Well. This is a program for people who just want to feel better or maybe learn more about ourselves and the stuff we normally keep on the interior. This week we're going to be talking about race and othering and empathy, along with our co-host, Dr. Brian Goff, Dr. Jenna Lejeune, and we're welcoming Mitchell S. Jackson back to Portland. He's the author of Survival Math, Notes on an All-American Family. I love Mitchell's writing. His first book, Residue Years, was just one I was recommending to everyone who would listen. But this one, wow, it's getting all kinds of critical acclaim. He won the Whiting Award and the Ernest J. Gaines Award for Literary Excellence. His honors include fellowships from TED, the Lannan Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and Penn. And he's also a writer, clinical associate professor of writing at New York University. But what I want to say most is welcome home, Mitchell Jackson.
Thank you.
Wow. All of the reviews for Survival Math, Notes on an All-American Family, are off the charts. I bet it's beyond your wildest dreams to have your story resonate with so many people.
Well, I dreamed it. But it's great to see some of the dreams coming to fruition, for sure.
When you look at this cover, what does this evoke for you, all of these pictures of these men in your life?
I was in, where was I? Wisconsin the other night, and around people, I didn't know anyone in the room, and they had like one of those kind of stand-up things they use in the bookstores, and it was behind me. And one of the first things I said to the group was like, wow, it just occurred to me that I'm bringing my family with me everywhere I go.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so when I see that cover, what I see are memories of, between different family members. And like, I actually think about home every time. And so I'm carrying home with me all over the country, which is a really good feeling.
For people that don't know, Mitchell grew up here in Portland, Oregon, and this is where this show is broadcast from. Today, you're going to go back to that neighborhood and walk it with some other journalists.
Yes.
What do you expect to feel now, knowing that your story is out, that people in your neighborhood may have read it or will be reading it? Do you feel more exposed, more a part of?
Well, luckily, I wrote about the neighborhood in fiction with the Residue Years. And so I think people that like know me specifically, they are kind of already aware that this is something that I write about, and they know kind of my perspective on it. But I think this book might have a chance to reach a wider audience. And so that gives me a great joy to kind of keep alive my memory of home. And I was reading Toni Morrison's new essay collection, and she defined home as the memory that you share with like your family and your friends. And I think that's really what I'm talking about, right? These memories that I share with the people, my community.
In this book, you take on the topic of the way you were raised, the expectation of being Black, the role of masculinity. You combine it with poetry, with history. The format for me as a fellow writer is so beautiful.
Thank you.
It makes me want to cry when I think about how you birthed this, because you do it in a way that is very non-traditional.
Yes.
Did you work with other people to determine how that was going to be, or was that something that you felt was important to relay every aspect of your history and your family's history into this book?
Well, yes, I definitely worked with people to shape it. I think the book kind of had different iterations. Like in the beginning, I knew going in that I wanted to write essays. So I always imagined that each, what maybe people would consider chapters, were like essays. And in that case, they were like explorations of an idea. And so I would have the idea, and then I would ask myself, okay, do I have an experience that in some way illuminates this idea? Or does one of my family members have something that illuminates this idea? So I went in with that. And then later on, once the title kind of crystallizes Survival Math, that's when I thought about these survival files, which are the men on the cover. I took photographs of them, and then I also asked them the same question: what's the toughest thing that you've survived? And then I write their stories as second-person narrative. So that came after I was already thinking about Survival Math. And then really, really late in the process, I was about to hand in what I thought was a last draft. And I was like, oh, I want to be able to frame these kind of really particular stories about a community in the kind of national conversation about race and class and all of those things. And so I was like, well, I should take the documents that everyone loves and venerates and use them to frame it. And that's where the poems came from. So those are actually centos, and the poems are found lines from Declaration of Independence, Gettysburg Address, Plessy versus Ferguson. So there are 10 documents that I use to kind of frame it. So when you look at the cover and it says All American Family, that's really me trying to critique this idea of Americanness.
I love this. We were talking last week about, as all white people in this room, how difficult this conversation is, because there is now a kind of tense feeling in the air if you even bring up race. And so I want you to guide us, because I always just want to say, look, I'm probably going to offend somebody by something that I say. It's probably not a safe place with me at the microphone. But how would you encourage us to go forward in a real and honest conversation about race, where we don't have to feel like, ugh, am I even supposed to weigh in?
Yeah. Well, two things that I've been thinking about the last 2 days, which are the days that I've been here. One, I was like, I have been reading about a fair amount of like white supremacist rhetoric and action in Portland. I don't really remember it that much when I was young, but I also wasn't paying attention to the news in that way, and we were pretty insulated in our community, or maybe segregated in our community is a better way to think about it. Yeah,
both.
And then I've also been thinking, how could it be? Because I also think there are like, if you ask most people, they would say that Oregon's like the home of liberals, right? So I'm like, how could it be that both white supremacists and liberals could coexist in this place, and both of them think it's like a bastion for their ideology? So that's a question that I would really want to pose to like white people, like what is it? What's the commonality that makes this a great place for both of those kind of ideals?
Wow. Go ahead, Jenna.
I mean, it's kind of hard to speak to these big general social issues. But just as a human being, I think homogeneity is a common factor. I mean, as somebody, as a white woman who also would like to think of myself as a liberal or progressive, you know, one of the things I learned is it's really easy for me to be quote unquote liberal and progressive when everybody around me thinks and looks and does exactly what I think and look and do.
Yeah.
And I think that type of insulated homogeneity also breeds things like white supremacy.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I do think that there are commonalities in that.
Yeah. Mitchell, one of the beautiful things that you do in this book is you pay so much respect to your mother, especially for the trials that she went through. And you're so clear-faced about her battle with addiction, and that in some way, the culture in which you were raised, addiction breeds a familiarity with drugs, breeds the ability to be a dealer as you were, breeds the ability to say, this is the life that I was supposed to live. I want you to talk just a little bit, for especially people who don't know your story, about that genealogy, if you would, how that all began.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, I would start it in the maybe 60s or 70s. Maybe you can go back to really the Vanport flood, at least in Portland, where the African-American community was displaced because of the flood and then moved into Northeast Portland. And then the early white flight of people who were already here, I think it was Scandinavians mostly, that was in Northeast Portland, and then left when the black folks came. And then once Northeast Portland became a community for black people, then there's like, okay, so what are the kind of, what's the game plan for oppression, right? So it's like underfund the schools, let crime run rampant, you know, like allow the drugs to come in the community. So all of these things were happening all over the country and in Portland, in Northeast Portland. And so if you already have that, and then you have people who are struggling in other aspects of their life, then it makes it pretty easy to for addiction to flourish, and, you know, things that are criminalized. And so my mother was, I guess you could say, an early adopter in that sense, because she started using in the mid 1980s, and crack didn't hit America until the 80s.
Right.
And you could see it in our community. You could see when people started like wandering around really late or really early, and the way they look. And we didn't really I didn't have precedent for it, right? So it took until like, I just knew things were strange, that it didn't look like this before. And then, the movies started coming out where I would get to see what I would have signs of it. And so I saw that, and, my mother struggled for many years with it. And I think at the same time, the guys that were a little older than me started selling. And so I can remember, I remember specifically there were two, in this time they were like drug houses, right? So someone would take over a house and kind of set up shop in there until someone, police came and raided it. But I can remember where if I close my eyes, I can remember where the drug houses were. And just kind of watching that, but still not, still kind of being insulated from it, because I was also, I was in the church choir at school, in church, and I went to Sunday school with my cousins, and, I was at King getting, the little sticker on your shirt when you get good grades.
Wow.
So all of these things were happening simultaneous, but around the late 1980s, early 1990s, it became more attractive to me, and so I started selling drugs for a little while, and then ended up going to prison for selling when I was in college.
You tell a story about at one point when you're dealing and there is a gun to the back of your head and you recognize the voice.
Yeah. This guy, man, this dude is going to be, I guess he has had, it's crazy because he has had such a profound effect on my life, and our moments of interaction are so few. Like if you counted the amount of time that we actually spent together, it might add up to 4 hours.
Wow.
Or something. But the times when I thought, man, I could actually die in this moment, he's responsible. And if it happened 4 times in my life, he's definitely responsible for 2 of them. And tell listeners who he is. This is a guy whose street name is Stitches. I won't name his real name, though. He's doing a few life sentences, so it's not like he's coming home. But I think he was he's like the ultimate product of all of these, the confluence of all of those things that I was talking about, right? Like, what happens when you just give up? And you give up, and you also got a pistol. And he is that guy.
The words that he said to you in the back of your car made you begin to think about race differently, in the idea that, is it a story that we've told ourselves? Is it the assumption that we make about ourselves?
Yeah.
And in a really riveting TED Talk, you say we need to be colorless.
Yeah, well, that would be, I think that what I was saying was we need to invest or deconstruct both whiteness, and we cannot deconstruct whiteness without deconstructing blackness, because they're twins, right? Like, we have whiteness in America because of the need to oppress blackness. And so if we talk about need to get rid of this, and which I'm all for, figuring out a way to kind of deconstruct it, and for us to build a kind of national and individual identity that is not grounded in race. But then what does that happen to blackness, right? So I think I don't have the answer for that, and I don't even actually know how you would do that. But I do think it's like embedded in the language, right? When people talk about post-race America, we're actually both saying that race will never cease, right? How can we have post-race America with race in our definition of it?
Yeah.
So it's. I mean, I don't know. I throw that out to y'all. What do you think about post-race America, but calling it race?
I don't know. It's really great that those are my first words for this podcast is, I don't know.
But I think that's everyone's answer in terms of that question, to tell you the truth.
Well, it feels so large. The few things, and I don't know if this is right on the money about the question, but one of the things that caught my ear when you were was you said he is a product of this confluence of all of these influences. Yeah. And that's very different than like Stitches is the way Stitches is because Stitches is that way.
Right, yeah.
You know, that there's this context that all of this happens in, and that context informs how we are, and it also paints a story or a picture of what we can be.
Yeah.
And in the preparation for this conversation, we were having some email exchanges, and it's like this idea of some people, either due to their socioeconomic status or the color of their skin, are told you can be whatever you want to be. And when you look around, you can see people who look like you, who represent models of like, oh yeah, I know one of those, and I know one of those, and I could see myself doing that. And for other people, either because of their SES or the color of their skin or some other factor, their gender, they're said, here's your path.
Yeah.
Here's your default
Right.
journey through life.
Yeah.
And maybe if you're really lucky, you can
Exceptional.
escape. Yeah, you can escape the gravitational pull of that.
Yeah.
But there's this default gravitational pull
Yeah.
that you're trying to beat. And to me, that's what kind of kept coming back in my head when I was thinking about whiteness and blackness.
Yeah.
And I would say, actually, Brian, I think everybody's sold a story. I mean, I don't know that white kids are sold the story, you can be whatever you want to be. They're sold the story, you can be all these really great things. And then if maybe you're the exception, then you'll end up screwed up in this particular way.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely flipped for more marginalized groups, whether that's
Right.
African Americans or non-binary folks or whatever it is. So
For the white kid, it's
Exactly.
what happened to you. And for the
Exactly.
black kid, it's like, how'd you
Exactly.
get out?
Yeah.
Exactly. That's 100%.
Wow.
Yeah.
You talk about the importance of men, and I love it's either an essay or a poem where you say we need men. We need real men. We need men in our lives. And if you don't have one, you must find one, and you must emulate the best man that you have. Who was the best man in your life?
I don't know. Best man is, I think, I try not to look at it in terms of best, but more in terms of like, what are the qualities that this person exemplifies that I might emulate? And so there are qualities in my grandfather, there are qualities in my stepfather, there are qualities in my father, my biological father, uncles. And so that's really what I was doing, is like pulling from places that I felt that I needed. And then obviously, you hopefully gain a little wisdom, or at least a little more knowledge. And then you say like, oh, well, that one, maybe I need to put that one back.
Yeah.
Get this other thing. That one didn't work out so well.
I do that with men, Jackson. So I know where you're coming from on that one.
Yeah. You're like, that was on sale. I don't have to pay full price for this.
Getting back to your mom, who is just such a character. I love the story that you tell in your book about when she's going down to the plasma center, and she's obviously really, really brilliant. And you ask her something about what a patriot is.
Yeah.
Talk about that if you would.
Yeah. So I was asking her, because the blood donation, as we know, it started during war efforts. And, to provide blood for wounded soldiers. And so I don't know if I even told my mother this context, but I asked her what her definition of a patriot was. And just really on the fly, she said that a patriot was like a mother, because a mother loves their child, even if their child is wrong in some instances. They like stand behind their children. And then she said that that's the same thing that like a patriotic person does for their country, right? They love them even when they're not necessarily doing the right thing. And so I thought that was really interesting. The other kind of, I guess, thesis that came out of that essay was that the people who are most marginalized in America, but also maintain a sense of national pride, are the most patriotic. So if we talk about like a super patriot, it's like a marginalized group who manages to kind of work through all of that oppression to get to a place that they love their country.
So are you asking people who read this book, are you asking Black people to become these kind of patriots? Is that what you're asking?
No. I think I'm 43.
Too big, Sheila.
There's never been I don't think it's never been a greater challenge to people of color since I've been alive to like not be patriotic.
That is so awesome. So I want to just ask you about some things that have happened in pop culture.
Okay.
And you know, Nike, your hometown company that grew up, it's supportive Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah.
When you see this, and yet you know, Nike was there in your neighborhood, and it has a difficult relationship with its own community.
Right. Yeah.
So how does that sit for you now?
I remember the first Nike store on MLK is where I got my first pair of Jordans, 84. Oh, it was so nice. I think we really loved them then. I think Nike is, I think they're learning, right? They're evolving like all kind of organisms. And I think I appreciate the way in which they're evolving. I think that the Colin Kaepernick support was courageous. But then I also know they're a company, so I'm sure they did their due diligence on like measuring what was going to be the effect, what was the right time to make the announcement. So I don't want to just be like, I don't want to kind of not be critical of it, but I also think it's still for a company like, because you could do all the research and then like we did the research and thought, Hillary was going to win. Right? And then we didn't get that. So like the research is not always right. So I just still think it's courageous on their part to support him in the way that they did. And that made me actually feel really proud to be, from Nike country.
Yeah, no doubt. I was thinking about just even the challenge that a company like Nike has in getting people of color to come work there, because they say, where do I get my hair done?
Yeah.
Where's the bars where I go? Where do I hang out? Like there's not this example, back to your original question to Jenna about, why can we have both supremacists and liberals in the same place? We can't get more people here.
Yeah.
They don't come until there are more people. It's it's an interesting chicken and the egg dilemma.
Yeah. Well, we know where I guess the chicken was the exclusion law.
That's exactly right.
So this is just the kind of historic kind of play out of what the founders of this place we are in intended. And I do think one of the things that I think about with the kind of Nike and the recruitment is that they're recruiting a higher economic class. You don't get recruited by a company to move places unless you're in a certain socioeconomic class, right? So like, even if they come, they're still kind of in a certain way separated from the kind of people who have been economically and socially struggling here. So that it's harder to form a community when you have that kind of class stratification inside of the group. So
that's so interesting.
I don't know how you kind of bridge that gap, except to say maybe you all need to think about creating more opportunities for the people who are already struggling here to give them education. And I'm sure these are programs that they already have in place, but maybe it needs to be more so that you actually bring the people up that are here, because I'm sure there's a lot of great potential of people that are already here, and they would probably get more kind of currency out of helping us actually reach those kind of, I mean, I have a friend who's the head of Nike basketball, but like he's the only executive that I know at Nike that grew up with me.
Yeah. I know. I think many companies are faced with this challenge right now. They actually don't want to deal with the old habits. They don't want to deal with the old paradigms, and they are stuck in that you don't win doing it either way, right? You've got to both attract the highest earners and the people with the most talent at the highest level, and you also have to have the programs to bring them out. So sometime hopefully we meet in the middle where it's just a normal way of doing business. So we talk on this program a lot about mental health, and I know in most Black communities, it's very, very rare for people to speak openly about having mental health struggles. And yet what you described, especially with your mom, it appeared to me that she was masking a lot of her anxiety and her depression with drugs. I didn't have the language for that at that moment. I mean, I could see sadness. I don't know if it was depression. I mean, now looking back, I can
probably label it that, but I mean, we don't have the language. I remember when we were growing up, like you would just dismiss someone as crazy, right? Like there was the language did not exist to say that this person has a mental health struggle.
Right.
Right. And I think that is so important. And it's even how I try to frame some of these conversations around race and class. It's like it's not. There are forces that are maybe outside of their control that like put a person into this dilemma.
Right.
Right. And I think that the mental health community has been really good in kind of bringing that. And also, I think like with gender, I think that's also like the language is like evolving in those communities much more than it is in I think in terms of like race and class. But yeah, I think there's another person I write about in the files who struggles with schizophrenia, right? And that's something that we would have been kind of dismissive of in the 1980s, me being the people in my community who just didn't know any better, right? We didn't have that kind of language. We weren't studying that. And now, me, like I know a very famous, I don't know if famous is the right word, very successful writer who also struggles with schizophrenia. And I was like, wow, like how does he do? I didn't even know that was possible, that you could live, like manage it in that way and still be, achieve prosperity in your life and success. And so really, I guess I should be thanking you all for like giving us that kind of language.
Well, that's very gracious of you. I'm not sure. Being on the inside of the mental health world of things, I'm not sure that we've done that great of a job. I think one of the things that traditional psychiatry has done is used mental health struggles, and I love how you call it that, mental health struggles. We've used it as another way to other people. So we talk about it as, yeah, but they have a disease or they have an illness, and as opposed to how you described it, which is kind of more in line with how I might approach it. There are external factors that are influencing, that are kind of creating these struggles for people. And so, of course, some of those factors have to do with genetics, but a lot of those factors have to do with our external context of things, and things like access to good healthcare, access to other resources, all sorts of other things.
Years and years ago, decades now probably ago, I would sometimes say that we either know pathology or we pathologize normalcy. So it's like a legitimate struggle, but it's fine, it's no big deal. Or we take the common struggles of life and say like, well, I'm upset, I'm not thrilled, so something's wrong, so I need a pill. So we pathologize normalcy. And now I'm sort of like, what if it's just normal to be pathological? And then it's not pathological, it's just normal to struggle. And why do we have to make this distinction? Why do we have to say there's this categorical difference between, say, sadness and depression? It's like, I'm really sad, and it is the way that I'm carrying it and experiencing it interferes with my ability to move around in the world the way I want. Period. End of paragraph. Well, not. We can keep talking, but that's the thought. Like, that we
and
don't
thanks for joining us today. As Brian has just ended the show.
Mic drop. Period. End of paragraph. We can keep writing. But that idea of like, why make that really strong distinction?
But Mitchell, even what you were saying about your writer friend who struggles with schizophrenia, and you having this story like, oh, people with schizophrenia can't be successful writers. Like that's part of how we other people. That's the same story as, oh wow, I didn't know like a black kid growing up in like inner Northeast could be, the executive of Nike or something like that. So part of the problem is that when these labels start to define our expectations of people, I think that's super problematic. And one of the things I really appreciate about your work, and I see it actually even in the cover of your Survival Math. I think about it as like this idea of a tapestry, like a story being this interwoven of all these like men in your life, and I'm sure women and all sorts of other people, but seeing it as this very rich, complex story as opposed to the story of, oh, this is what it means to be a schizophrenic or a black man or a white woman.
Or have depression or
Yeah.
have anxiety.
Yeah.
I want to talk about this amazing quote. It bothers me that concern about blacks in America is topical, that our lives count most when we're murdered or commit some headline crime. It troubles me that our worth is measured against what white people in power care about on a given day, week, month. The stories of my people are evergreen.
Been
Let me
doing your
just-
research, huh, Sheila? That's an interview.
Oh, man. I swear, you're writing. Well, first of all, just the whole, I think that you speak to how ripe this situation is and how every one of us feel urgent need to fix it, and yet how powerless we all are. I feel so powerless, except just to say, I love you as the entire being that you are and everything you bring.
Thank you. Yeah.
When you talk about it, and it is so true that it's topical, it's headline driven, it's, Black Lives Matter, everybody going to the march. Well, yeah, maybe Sunday, but not 2 months from now.
Right. Yeah.
What do we do about it?
That's a really good question. I think I'll tell you what I see my job is. Like you start thinking about the big problem, like you get nowhere. But I was asking myself earlier today, like, why am I doing this? Like, what do I want to get out of this? And I think what I want to do is create more me's. And when I say that, I mean I want to create more people who like question the system, right? To like evolve and to question it, and then to figure out like which question am I going to dedicate to? Because you can't dedicate to all of the questions, but like I think you can figure out at some point like, okay, this is my concern, and I'm like going to commit to this, and then also you never stop even questioning, why you're already engaged in that kind of commitment. And I think at least for the people in my community who I'm most familiar with, I think we stopped asking questions about why, and we just started saying, how can I get around this? Right? Like I understand that this is the world, and I'm like, okay, so what am I going to do? Right? Okay, I can't go get a job, but I can go do this. Right? But we don't say like, well, what's the historical context of me not being able to get a job? And I think that broadens your perspective, which is hard to do when you're caught up in it.
Bet it is.
Like it's easier for me to do it now with like health insurance and a teaching salary, right? You know, but I do think like if you can't see the beginning and the kind of scope of it, then it's harder to like navigate the circumstances. So put the question in your head, kind of commit to that, and then like keep trying to recontextualize like how we got to this
Beautiful,
place.
beautiful answer. You guys want to add anything to that? Because go ahead.
Go ahead.
You had said in this Baldwin quote, you open with it, that man who is forced each day to snatch his manhood, his identity out of the fire of human cruelty that rages to destroy it knows, if he survives his effort, and even if he does not survive it, something about himself and human life that no school on earth and indeed no church can teach.
Yeah.
You're saying we ourselves have got to be the teachers.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Just beautiful.
The thing that I was thinking about this business of the topic of race and when it shows up, and in response to, African American kid getting shot by cops or something like that. There's an article written a number of years ago by a psychologist named Stephen Hayes, and he suggested that empathy for all of us is hardwired. Like it's wired in that we hurt when we see other people hurt. And especially when we see them as part of our tribe. I mean, we evolved in bands and tribes, and the good of the people in my tribe was the good for me. Like if you survive and you're in my tribe, then that's good for me. But if I see your pain and I feel it like it's my pain, if I don't know how to sit with that pain and do something constructive with it, The solution for that is to make you other, is to describe you in a way or to think of you in a way so that you and I aren't alike. Because then you're not in my tribe, and then I don't have to hurt as much. And this is racism, it's homophobia, it's lack of concern for people who don't have health care, the poor. That if I can somehow say, like, this has, like, your otherness makes you different than me, and then the kicker is, if I can somehow blame you for the pain that you have, that it's on you because of your otherness, I relieve myself of my pain. And so he suggests we can't afford to do that in this big, modern, broad world. We can't afford to silo ourselves from each other. It's not like that. So the solution is we have to figure out how to be more open with the pain we experience and then do something constructive with it.
It's so beautiful.
That connects to, I can't remember I think it's Renan, when I write in, I think it's American Blood, where I was talking about a nation, and it says that what binds a nation is shared suffering, more than like shared, good things happening.
You asked in the beginning how in Portland, Oregon, white supremacists and liberals could be both flourishing. And I think that what Brian is talking to really illuminates that point, that because we get really comfortable in these groups with, and we don't understand those people. I'm going to talk about white supremacists right now. I think they're really rigid and uneducated, and I'm not going to even attempt to understand their way. Well, that doesn't do us any good. Like it keeps us apart, othering. I'm othering them, just as you talk about that. And I honestly have thought one of the worst examples of that is when the two sides coalesce down in the parks and stand there shouting at each other. Like, I keep thinking, are we ever really going to have listening opportunities to understand what the rigid paths of learning that these white supremacists were on to make them still continue to believe this? It's the only hope I think we have.
Well, there's rationale and there's reasoning, right? So rationale is like, I hold this conclusion and I'm going to develop a kind of flawed logic to reach this conclusion. So anything. So like, those people don't deserve to live. I need a rationale to develop. But that's different from reasoning, right? Where you examine the facts, you apply knowledge to it, right? You apply compassion. So, I mean, yes, I do think that there needs to be some kind of dialogue, but like, some things just don't stand up to reason. So like, it's hard to like try to apply reasoning to people who are rationalizing.
Oh, that's fascinating. So in your mind, when there's something that's so clearly wrong, it's immoral, that at this point, would you say we just don't continue a dialogue? We just do what we've done, which is essentially move them out until they die.
No, I don't think you can do that. What I'm saying is, I think the difficulty is when you're trying to apply reasoning to people who are rationalizing. Like, that, to me, they're parallel. Right? So I don't know how maybe it's a chasm that you can't bridge. I would hope that somehow there can happen, but like, I think that's the thing, is like, to me, this is like clear rationalizing, right? Like, if you just say like, what is it, King, that said like the ultimate telos of racism is genocide, that these people don't deserve to live. You can't defend that with reasoning. Right? No. So like, if someone is a committed racist, that cannot, like, you can't apply reason to that, right? So then what is the dialogue that you have with someone who you cannot reason with? I don't know. I don't know.
And so then maybe the question becomes, what produced that?
Let's not do that again.
Yeah, exactly. Like that might be the point of intervention there. Of saying, okay, we got to figure out how that happened.
Where does the misunderstanding come from? Where does the anger come from? Where does the hatred come from? And I think that's when the article that I cited about looking at empathy, and that it's like, if I cannot sit with my pain, then my solution is to other you. And then the extreme version of that is this racism or homophobia or whatever. In that article, I believe there was a citation of a study where they said that prejudice towards Jews goes up, not down, as you understand the suffering that they experienced in the concentration camps. That it's like, I hear more pain, and it's like, that you would think that would be like, oh God, that's terrible.
Yeah.
We do have this, oh God, that's terrible. But there's also this underlying, like, actually racism towards Jews goes up, not down.
My hunch, I don't know anything about the study. My hunch is because people are fearful of it. I don't want that to happen to me. They must have done something that they became victims of that. Indeed, they are other. My hunch is just, it's so frightening to believe that can actually happen to people. And so we all want to protect ourselves by saying, well, that won't ever happen to me.
Yeah, and I mean, just as humans are hardwired to be empathic when we see somebody as in our tribe, we're also incredibly evolved to avoid pain.
Yeah.
And so if the way that I can avoid pain is saying, well, this happened to them because they're that way and I'm not that way,
right.
then I don't have to feel that pain.
I think that actually gets down to some of what we've been speaking about with how many black men are in prison, how many are arrested, how rudely out of control those statistics are, is that people in there wanting to say, well, they must have done something because they can't believe that could happen to them. They can't believe that they could just be driving down a road and be pulled over for nothing. So they immediately jump to, well, they must have done something wrong, right? It's almost like a protective mechanism for people.
Well, I mean, and in our country, it probably isn't going to happen to them. Like there actually are systems set up such that
exactly,
it is going to happen to the black man driving the car, and it's not going to happen to me and my, the white woman driving my car doing the same thing. So,
I think now with the social media that you and I are still figuring out,
we are.
that it's near impossible for a person to plead ignorance. Right? Like,
right.
You look at the views on Philando Castillo, you listen to the how many people have heard the tape of Trayvon. Like, there's millions and millions and millions of people watching this trauma, right? Like, you can't plead that anymore. I mean, maybe, in 1955, you didn't listen to the radio, but, like, that's over.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Not only can we not plead ignorance, we get way more info, we also get way more pain.
Yeah.
We're exposed to so much more suffering.
Yeah.
I mean, I think probably in the average day, if you're on social media and you've got the television on, you're probably exposed to more news than your grandparents experienced in a month or a year.
And at the same time, we are bombarded even more and more with this story of, like, if you suffer, that means there's something wrong with you. Like, there's this beautiful Bell Hooks quote about kind of this myth. The greatest myth that we are told is that those who suffer are the unvaluable ones, and that the more that you suffer, the less valuable you are. And we're sold this story that if you suffer, there's something wrong with you. And so here we get bombarded with all of this suffering, and we're told, oh my God, we're not supposed to be suffering.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's such a wonderful place to leave it, because if anything that you really did so beautifully is that you really plumbed the suffering of your family, of your ancestors, of your own story, and what a triumph you've come up with.
Thanks.
Mitchell, it's so great to see you. I hope the pals will be packed. I'll be there. I'll be the fangirl at the back. Survival math notes on an all-American family. Mitchell S. Jackson. Memorize this name. He is going to be so big.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.